Welcome to Show Studio. It's our second panel of Paris Couture Week. This morning we were talking about Stoppard and now we're going to be talking about Dior. So it's a real kind of store on the couture schedule. So it's a really exciting one to discuss. And we can also spend a little bit of time unpicking Raf Simons and what he's done with the brand, both in the couture and the ready-to-wear. But before we delve any deeper into the world of haute couture, I'll just let my wonderful panel introduce themselves, starting with you, Alex.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Alex Fullerton and I'm the fashion director of Stylist magazine.
Heather?
My name is Heather Sproat and I'm the tutor for fashion design with marketing on the BA Fashion at Central St Martin's.
And I'm Peter Jensen and I'm a fashion designer.
Let's start by talking a little bit about Dior as a house, because for me, I think Dior, it really summarises sort of Paris. It's such a Parisian brand, and couture, it just seems to be all about sort of Dior. That's why we looked at something like Couture Week. Do you feel that, Alex, when you look at it?
Yes, you think of that stereotype, Paris in springtime, pretty girl in a big full skirt, dreamy, kind of like walking along the Champs-Elysees with blossom on the trees, and she's obviously wearing Dior. You can't help putting those codes together. So
Parisian. Do you agree with that, Peter? Is Dior a brand that you feel excited by?
Oh God, yes, absolutely. I think that you would look at Dior and just think that that's the pinnacle of, alongside Chanel and those kind of big houses of couture and the incredibly wealthy clients, and they smell good, I'm sure. Because I think that is also one thing that you associate with a house like Dior. I really, yes, absolutely, quality and good smell.
Perfection. I like that good smell. It's so true. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because so much of a part of couture now is this idea of kind of the show being about, sort of selling the brand. It's not just about the clothes. It's really this idea of Chanel, whether that's the Chanel lipstick, the perfume, or the couture outfits themselves. It's very sort of about getting a brand identity across. And right. I guess what I want to ask is, what do we think the identity of Dior is at the moment? Because it has gone through sort of a period of change recently with Raf Simons. How would you typify Dior at the moment? What do you see it as?
I mean, I think they made a very, it was a strong decision to appoint Raf, but I think it's that, it was a very, very positive one, and I think they really are looking for modernity and to completely refresh what Dior means in the 21st century. I think it was brave, but I think as the last three shows, particularly the couture shows, have shown, he's really looking to push where the brand can go. I mean, for me, if I think about couture, it really is the luxury of being able to craft garments which aren't possible. You don't have the budget, you don't have you just don't have the mechanics to make these garments possible in any other way than with kind of the couture techniques that they have at their fingertips. So it's like just having the world at your fingertips. You can do anything, if you've got a couture atelier behind you. So he's really pushing in a much more contemporary, modern way what fashion can be.
I think when you say modern, that's really interesting, because there is a sense with Raf, he's a designer that looks to the street, that especially in his menswear, it's something that's always been talked about. He's a very kind of pragmatic designer in that sense. It's not really the romance or the narrative that we saw with Galliano. Is this kind of, there's a rawness to what he does. Is that fitting for Dior, and is that fitting for couture? Do we find that quite exciting, that merge of kind of this urban street sensibility with, as you said, the access to these incredible ateliers? That seems to me quite a modern clash.
Well, it certainly brings some modernity, like what you were saying. I think he's definitely brought that into the label, into the couture, as it stands of now. I think taking it away from, I don't mean this in a bad way, but probably what Galliano ended up looking more like a drag show. There was a kind of, it was very much over the top, and I think it's been scraped back to something where it's all to do with garments, clothing, quality, and something that you think of as a incredibly beautiful girl would wear, really, and still look stunning in it. It would fit beautifully and just have that quality to it. And maybe that is, modernity, street style, youth. I mean, there's some youthfulness to it, I think.
And even if he takes a really generic theme like gardens, which I think he did for last spring's couture, it doesn't look like any other interpretation of gardens. It's it's modern, it's cool, it's street, it's refreshed and free, and there's no sort of old-fashioned flounce to it, which I think couture has had. I don't know, going through in the 90s or whatever, it had that sort of old-fashioned ruffles, flounce, pour it all on. So he's been very clever in stripping it back.
I think flounce is a really astute word to use, because that is what maybe sort of you can summarise Raf as. It feels a lot more streamlined. There's still that romance and there's still that elegance, but there isn't that kind of flounce.
Yeah, there's a flu and a flow, but no flounce.
Yeah, it's a turn of phrase, isn't it? God, she's good. Heather, I want to ask you a little bit, because you have a very interesting relationship with Dior, because you've worked in the atelier for a while. Is that correct? Tell me about that.
After I graduated from college, I was awarded the Royal Warrant Holders Queen Elizabeth Scholarship for craft, and to go and study haute couture tailoring. And very luckily, I managed to get an interview with Galliano, and he'd only been there, I think, a couple of years, and they allowed me to come, and I spent a year studying haute couture tailoring in the tailoring atelier up on the 6th floor on Rue François Premier, and it was amazing. I mean, it really, really was. Unless you've actually been there and worked amongst all of, I mean, they call them the petit man, but all the lovely ladies all the lovely ladies and gentlemen, tailors, whose skills are, they've spent a lifetime acquiring, and we think of garments as you can design it and you can make it really quickly, but a tailored jacket might be 3 months in toing and froing with fittings, and from conception to completion for a client. It's the hand stitching, it's the handwork that goes into making them. And when I was there, Galliano was incredibly challenging in what he was asking the women to do. He really did push boundaries of what they were used to doing, and the kind of techniques and fabrics and things that we'd be asked to use that they'd never ever used before, and they would, there'd be lots of and poofing going on, kind of, because it was. And he achieved some amazing shapes, and it was a dream. Really.
How much work? Tell us a bit about how much work would go into some pieces. Because I think people they associate couture with all this sort of handwork and the lengthy amount of time that goes into designing and producing something, but you must have really experienced that firsthand. Hours and hours of toil.
If you imagine a skirt, a jacket, anything for ready-to-wear pret-a-porter, you would overlock the edges on a machine normally to stop any fabric from fraying. Well, if you're making couture skirts, not only have you got the fabric, you'd probably put it on georgette, or it's called pose it on georgette or chiffon to help any of the fabric that you have last a little bit longer. But all of those layers are hand stitched with overlocking. Every single piece of the pattern is hand stitched instead of using a machine to whiz away. That's just to prepare the pattern before you've even started sewing it together.
Do you think that ever gets lost a little bit, that sense of handwork, from the way that the shows, they are so theatrical? Some of them, people often point to the sort of grand sort of extravaganza that Chanel does. Do you think, in a way, that kind of focus on doing what I guess I was talking about before, which is building the brand and creating this theatre and this magic around the name, do you think that means occasionally that the handwork does get a little bit eclipsed because it becomes all about the theatre, whether it's a great globe setting or all these flowers on the walls? Are we losing our way a bit with couture?
No, I don't think, because I don't think that you view it as a thing where you're thinking, oh, this has been done on a budget, or this is something that is going into a showroom afterwards to be sold for the consumer to go on. But I mean, I think that one really looks at it. I mean, certainly personally, I do definitely look at it and think, God, I mean, the handful of people that can go in and buy this amazing piece of. There, I think with couture, there you can really talk about has the fashion and art sort of crossed the boundary, because I'm very I'm really in awe of the handwork and of the skills that these people have. I mean, you cannot get away from that there is a skill, and maybe that skill will die out eventually at some point if not new people get educated in that way. But I think where you've seen is that the Chanel documentary behind the scenes, the French director that did that, where you saw how long, you know, that
Everything
one
took,
dress
yeah.
that got recut in Panay, I don't know how many times, and then it was just a big sign, dress sucks, and it was out of the, I mean, so I think one doesn't look at it and think it doesn't cost money, and the money is not just there to be spent on a couture show.
Stylists, are your readers interested in that side of fashion, that kind of the craft, I guess, or?
I think they are. What they want to know clothing-wise is what's gone into it. And we can all sit here and we know that everything is so immaculately done, and the time that it takes, so you want to kind of get that across. When we've shot couture, we went to Paris and we shot it in that very romantic way that we talked about at the very start. But then kind of in news stories or features, you want to try to get across why it's important and why it costs a fortune, and really the skills and the people and, you know, the tradition going down maybe generations of people learning it. And it's almost, it's an artisan kind of craft. It's not just making clothes, and that's why it's so special.
Yeah, I think when you say it's not just making clothes, that's really astute, because there is this idea of it being kind of giving people the form to develop techniques. And like, do you find, you mentioned kind of, you know, the suggestion of young people sort of going into couture and being interested by it. Do you find that with students, that they want to go and work in that kind of a context, or is it all about that kind of the immediacy of design now rather than that kind of craft?
We do workshops with the final years and with the second years, talking to them about, we don't expect them necessarily to become couturiers, but talking to them about the basic techniques and how layering a fabric and then using a stitch to hold the layers together, and then turning the fabric and using another stitch. Using those kind of techniques, you can translate into lots and lots of different ideas. They're always absolutely fascinated. You know, they want to know more. They have a hunger to know about all the techniques. Then they're not necessarily, you know, they want to use that then in the way that they design. And there was a student a few years ago who'd done some, it wasn't actually one of my students, he was a women's wear student, and his name escapes me, but he did an amazing collection, and everything was hand sewn, you know, and it looked so beautiful. He put it together in such a clever way, and spent a year for his work experience in Savile Row learning tailoring, all of the hand skills that he needed, and then he did a women's wear collection, which was completely hand sewn, and it was amazing.
You're nodding.
Well, I was just thinking, it's almost like learning that technique and that skill is like learning how to do sushi, isn't it? I mean, it's like you go through years and years of training, which is the absolute beauty of it. I think that there lies the beauty of it, that you can't just within, you know, going to the BA learn within 3 years or being on the St. Martin's MA. You know, you cannot. I just think it takes such a enormous amount of skill to really craft that thing.
But are we losing that side of fashion a little bit, because we've got 4 seasons now, and the pace is so extreme, and designers are always doing collaborations and capsules and, you know, bits for the high street. Are we losing that sort of?
I think that's a good question for Alex. Being
good deflection there.
Thanks very much.
But I think as a journalist, you know how much exposure. What is the place for couture? You know, I mean, you could look at a beautiful Tim Walker picture where it's all about the couture dresses, and there's a whole flow of stories within that. But I don't know where and how the couture dresses fit in within in the real everyday life. I mean, I think that we in our magazine would use them as kind of special occasions and make an event out of it, like, this is the couture shoot in Paris. And use them kind of when I'm sort of planning stories in the season. There's got to be stories that are just going to let you dream. Yes, there are always shopping pages about things that you can go and buy now, but there has to be that space
for fantasy,
which I think is so key for fashion. And if there wasn't couture in this kind of fast merry-go-round, it would be devastating. I don't think it would just feel grey and processed and bland, even though there are amazing things happening already to wear, but you need that magic of couture.
So I guess it's not just about the technique, it's also about that magic and that the story that you get with couture.
I think also technically couture allows you to achieve shape and form and volume, which just is much more difficult in ready to wear.
Yeah, and also those techniques then do filter down to ready to wear. It's that interesting, you know, we actually talked about this morning, so I don't want to repeat too much, but that like laboratory of ideas where a technique can be cultivated and then it will inform ready to wear designers. What do you all think about the rise of kind of demi couture? You know, people have talked about it a lot over the last sort of 10 years or so, whether it was with like Olivier Teskin's when he was sort of doing his incredibly opulent dresses before he'd gone into theory, but also things like McQueen, you know, people say, oh, it is couture, but it isn't. And what do we think of that appearing on the ready-to-wear runway, these really handcrafted pieces?
Do you find that a little bit frustrating? Because there's a wonderful collection that you're seeing as a ready-to-wear show, and you want to shoot it, oh, but it's not going into production.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got a commercial collection and I can shoot that, and then I won't get complaints from readers about putting things they can't buy. But if there's something that is just purely, this is how you do it, this is the process, you can go to your atelier, you can buy it eventually, then it kind of needs to be explained that way.
Yeah. So do you think it's something that confuses people a little bit to see? Because I still think often people...
It's a little bit annoying. It's a little bit like, come on.
Yeah.
Can I have it? I want it. But then that's me just personally.
Because showpieces do sell as well, don't they? You know, that's another thing that's worth bearing in mind. What do you think of that, Peter, as a designer, seeing kind of those really kind of, as Alex says, they're not going to go into production. They're a showpiece.
Well, I think it lends to the idea of a fantasy. I think it do lends to the idea of a story that's being told and that you're trying to sell. I mean, in the ready-to-wear and the collections, you're trying to sell something. You're trying to sell some commercial goods, and then you're adding something, you know, that has a richer fabrication or richer textile knowledge, something like this. I mean, and I think it helps. I think it helps a collection sometimes to tell a story like this. And I'm sure that it'll be used in editorials and things like this without. Disagreeing without people not having to buy it. I think that it sort of maybe helps. The idea of fashion is something that can be out of reach, something that you want to try and be part of, but it's not just going to the high street and being told that that's okay, you can buy it here. But there is, you know, another level. There is another tier of this kind of fashion fantasy that we all seem to live in, and again going back to this kind of thing where, as I started saying, with smelling. Well, I mean, I really love these kind of exclusive. Dior has done them as well, perfumes that you know, and you go and smell them, and it's almost like that you can totally imagine that is what couture smells like. You know, these women that's just sort of dripping in this scent of couture,
perfection.
Yeah, with, you know, highly expensive Duchess satin dresses or something, you know.
But do we not wish then, you know, given that we're all saying we find that world so exciting, we do love that fantasy, do we not wish then that there were more designers who would aspire to be couturiers? Because we have seen a few sort of newer designers go onto the schedule. So Bushra Jara is a nice example, and Iris van Herpen, who's now doing ready to wear as well, but started with the couture. Do we not, maybe that would sort of get around this frustration, do we not wish that something like a house like McQueen had said, you know, right, rather than just putting some couture pieces at the end of our ready to wear, we're going to champion couture week and make sure that that Parisian week stays there, and we're going to show couture as well. Would we like to see that, or is it?
I think if you haven't got an atelier behind you, if you haven't got all of those people with all of those skills, it's a really, really difficult and challenging thing to do, because it's fine to say, yeah, well, we're in London and we can do, you know, we can do what we can do, but if you haven't got those people who've spent 40 years honing their skills, who are going to be able to turn out in time your perfection and your fantasy, and this is what I'm capable of doing, which is, you know, couture is really showing off. It's saying this is, you know, I'm it, and this is what I can do. Ta-da! If you haven't got that technical support behind you, I think it's really difficult, which is I think why in London we don't have such a history of couture. Because in France they excuse me, view artisanal skills in everything, in whether you're building bricks, whether you're making leather bags, or whether you're doing couture. The artisan is actually seen as a really positive job to be going into still. You know, when I was there were still young people coming up, young people coming through the Chambre syndicale, training and being taken on. You know, less than 40 years before, but there were still people coming through. And there's a real respect for craftsmanship and the use of your hands and carpenters and everything, you know, than there is in the UK. I think
that's really interesting. Do you think in the UK we put too much focus on sort of being a star designer rather than being a craftsman? Is there too much focus on, you know, to succeed in fashion, you set up your own label, you have, you know, your own brand, you don't aspire to, as you say, go through and do the handwork?
I think we possibly may be suffering slightly from a Haute culture.
It's a very diplomatic answer. But you must find that working with young people a lot, that what they aspire to, I guess, in
Well,
London.
they want to be successful, you know, and they want to show the world what they can do. Some of them are deeply interested in doing that via the use of their hands and showing what they can actually craft and make themselves, and they want to, you know, there is this backwater that's going on in fashion, I think, at the moment, of lots of designers who are actually kind of eschewing the bright lights and not wanting to be online so much and just doing what they do and having their cult status and having followers like Paul Harnden, those kind of people who are
I also think what you say there about, you know, sort of designers who really want to use their hands and do sort of stuff with textures, even designers that have been incredibly successful recently and are in the limelight. So someone like, you know, Simone Rocha is quite a nice example. This idea of handcraft seems to be having a real moment even in the ready-to-wear, which I guess is going back to this idea of respect for tradition, of how things are made. Have you noticed that at all, Peter, this idea of...
Yes, I think it all comes around in circles, because I think that was what happened when I graduated in '99 from the MA at St Martin's, that was very much what was happening right then, and then something else happened after that, and then now it's more back to that, because I think that's something, you know, it goes, all of a sudden you just you have to digest so much that you probably get filled up.
You want some authenticity.
Right, exactly. It's almost like you want a hand-knitted jumper and you're willing to pay this extra kind of money for it, because I think, you know, in the past year we've just been bombarded with how great the high street is, and that is what you need to buy. Where when I was at college, that was definitely not what you were allowed to talk about.
No, you wouldn't want to wear.
But so, yeah, I do think that things comes around, but going back, I do think it takes skills, because I trained as a tailor before I started my BA, and I spent the first year at the tailoring college, we spent a whole year hand sewing in a sleeve in a check jacket, and then the next day you had to undo it again, and then you had to do it again, and then you had to undo it again, until it was just perfection of what it was. And I always got told I had sweaty hands and couldn't do it. but so I think that the technique is the ultimate goal for couture. And I totally agree with that. I don't think that we have to set up in the UK for that at the moment.
No.
I don't think there's any finances for it. I don't think there's any schools for it. I don't know.
So do you think it's perhaps unfair? We see a lot of criticism, and often on these panels, of kind of the fact that the UK is so supportive of young talent, and why aren't we seeing sort of young talent popping up in Paris or Milan as much? But do you think actually, in a way, everything has its place? In London, we cater well to young star designers because we don't have that infrastructure for sort of heritage and craft in the same way. But actually, it's good in Paris that maybe there are these big blockbuster houses and there's not so much room for is that a good thing that those kind of structures are in place?
Everybody's kind of known, all the different cities are known for their different things. The New York is the kind of like the commercial sportswear, Milan is always a bit more sexy, London's got the cool new talent, Paris has got the traditionalism. So in however much you potentially try to fight a stereotype, I don't think that everything's there for a reason. So you could, and I think that the BFC are being supportive and helpful. If somebody really wanted to do it, then they'd be able to advise or put them in touch with people who could help them financially. And maybe there are people out there who are going to, I don't know, banging their computer screens going, but I want to set up my atelier, you know. But I don't know if there are.
Ralph Russo, who was showing, they're based in London and they have an atelier.
Good point.
So
Really good point. There we go. But even designers like, there's someone we love here, but Phoebe English, she went and trained with Mr. Pearl, and now she does stuff that's really sort of like handcrafted. And I think that idea of how it trickles down, maybe we don't have designers who are sort of setting up their ateliers, but they are trying to sort of embrace some of these techniques and use them. Have you noticed that sort of with your styling, this kind of handcrafty thing that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think more so over the past couple of seasons, you're looking at things and you're like, my God, this is so intricate, this is beautiful. And technically, because I haven't looked at the inside, so it might be an absolute mess. It may not be up to any kind of level of couture standards. But I think that people are thinking about more what's sort of going on. Can they bead it, and what can they do with sort of like layers of organza and things like that? So people are thinking with fabrics more.
And that seems like a sort of more, I guess, more sustainable form of fashion, when people care less about the immediate visual impact. They want something that feels a little bit more authentic. Is that a bit of a reaction to this kind of like, fashion wheel that we've had, that people are like, hang on, I just want something good, like good things?
I'd hope so. And even if all of the kind of like build your own home TV programs with Kevin McLeod and all of those, a load of the people that do them always want to make their home forever. And the food programs, they're kind of like trying to bring back artisan cheeses. So fashion is not anything to do with artisan cheese, but
it's the slow movement though. I get that slow fashion.
It's now, having had everything being fast, high fashion. People want something. I mean, when I buy things now, and I can't buy couture, but I would, if I could, then I'd want to wear it now until I'm 60.
Yeah.
And I do. Is this a bit weird? I imagine myself being 60 years old wearing things.
Exactly what couture's about, because we would have clients come back when I was working there who'd had a jacket that was 20 years old, and the way that couture is made is with the seam allowances inside, so that they would have it let out or taken in, or it would be altered. Everything would be there in order that as her figure changed or her shoulders moved, it would just be taken to pieces, put back, a brand new fresh lining put in, and there it would be as if, and that would all be part of the cost of that jacket.
Did you get to know the clients at all when you were out there? No.
No.
Tell me more. I'm so fascinated by it. Tell me more about what it's like being. Is it quite antiquated, and how it feels kind of behind the scenes?
And it's very strict and very clean, and all the tables are covered in white calico, and everybody's dressed in their white coats, and a lot of the time it's quite quiet, and you are just sitting and stitching, and there might be conversations going on, but it's just an awful lot of working very hard, concentration, working at speed, but being really careful about the work that you're doing.
And how often would Mr. Galliano be in the atelier?
In the atelier, I mean, he would come up probably once every 2 weeks, but a lot of the work would be going down to the studio. It's a very hierarchical system. There's the head tailor in the tailor's atelier, bearing in mind there's a tailoring atelier and there's a flue atelier, which is bigger, which is for all the dresses and blouses and all the soft fabrics. The tailoring atelier is for everything that's constructed.
Sure.
And you've got the tailor, and then you've got the tailor's first, and then the tailor's second, and then you've got all of the couturiers under that, and they would be in a hierarchy of who was allowed to do jackets, who was allowed to do skirts, who was allowed to do trousers, and I would be at the beginning picking out tiny little hairs from fabric that had been woven in the weaving process, but obviously couldn't be used in the fabric. So I would sit there with a needle for probably a couple of weeks, pulling out little hairs so that they could have the fabric, and it would be all perfect. I mean, by the end of it, I'd made a complete couture suit. I learnt so much. It was incredible. I've got a file this big full of all my notes.
Amazing.
But yeah, very hierarchical, very clean, mentally exhausting, but yeah, very rewarding.
What do you think they would have made of the appointment of Mr. Simmons?
Having seen the first show that he did, I think they would have been in their element. They found the transition from Ferre to Galliano quite difficult, because they were all kind of slightly in love with Gianfranco Ferre, and
no surprise there.
they were very used to his way of working. And when Galliano came along, that was quite a change of culture for them. and you know, what he's asking us to do this, you know, it was all quite but again, he challenged them to do things they'd never done before. And I think, you know, the first couture show definitely would have been stepping back to their comfort zone. You know, lots of strong tailoring.
Yeah, let's talk about that first couture show and what Raf Simons has brought there, because it does seem like, you know, a few people at the time of the appointment of Raf Simons and of Eddie. Are we getting pictures, not a stream, by the way?
No stream,
but we're getting pictures. Cool. No problem.
Fabulous.
With the appointment of Mr. Simons, a lot was made at the time because it was that same time that Eddie Slimane was appointed at Saint Laurent. Obviously, there was that huge hoopla made about that, but there was a lot said about the fact these are menswear designers doing these kind of women's wear roles. But actually, it's quite interesting how that's sort of manifested itself, because it does seem like, I don't know if it is because of his menswear background, but he's really brought this kind of tailoring and structuredness back to Dior. And obviously, we all knew Galliano for the kind of the bias cut dresses and that romance. But is it nice to see a bit of, to me, that it's more obvious that you can see the technique when something is really tailored? Do we like what he's doing there?
Oh, I do.
Yeah. You're like, I want it.
Yeah, I want it all. But it's also going back in the way that the house has this bar jacket, which is a traditional style of Christian Dior himself. And he's gone back and looked in the archives but made it modern, and it's still the same, it's reinvented, but it's now, and it's tailored. It's what young women want to wear, but would also look amazing when you're 60, or if you're a traditional client of the house and have been for 50 years.
And I guess that's an example of where you do see that trickle-down effect, because I, for one, consider, I've got a lot of friends who are now wearing really beautiful kind of tailored jackets, which is obviously because this bar jacket's back at Couture, and I think it's quite nice to see that sort of modernity come through.
But wasn't that a clever move of them? Because that was, you know, they sort of probably realised by bringing in someone like Raf Simons to the Dior brand that they would bring in a new generation of customers for the couture. You know, when the older ladies are dying out, they have someone new that introduces them to couture customers that might go and buy it in the future. And then, you know, he brings something cool and youthful to it, and something, you know, that they can relate to, the younger customers, and all of a sudden it's okay to say that you are interested in couture, you are interested in this world where before it might have been exclusive to a dying breed of ladies that
and I guess it felt removed from fashion before, didn't it? I think couture, it was sort of theatrical and it was incredibly opulent and incredibly interesting, but it didn't feel like it had a fashion relevance, perhaps. And I know it's simplistic to think that you'd want couture to inspire trends or anything, but it does feel now like, you know, you want to look to couture, especially this season. You're not just for Dior. Like, obviously, it's a particularly exciting season with the new appointment at Schiaparelli and obviously Hussein at V&A, but everyone wants to look at what he's doing now, and I think that's what couture should be, you know. I think it's really exciting.
And even if you wouldn't have thought of it before, his appointment, if you were more into edgy labels and never thought you would ever wear Dior couture, now him being there makes it okay. And you're like, oh, I can be myself and wear this.
Yeah, it feels like he's updating the house but he's also been, I think it's important, I would like to talk about it a little bit, which is how committed he's been to Christian Dior. You know, there's this real love affair going on there and everything that he referenced. I found it really interesting because I was just in Paris for the men's shows, and at the Dior Homme show, Chris Van Ash, who does their menswear, it felt almost like he was picking up on what Raf was doing he made all these references to the lily of the valley, which obviously was Christian Dior's sort of a flower that he thought was incredibly lucky. And I think and it felt like he was trying to mirror that sort of real romance and nostalgia for Christian Dior while really updating it, and that was really nice to see. And with Christian Dior, because he was only there for such a short amount of time, I'm interested to see sort of how he's managed to reference it in such a sort of an authentic way, but how he's going to be able to pull that on moving forward. Would you like to see him reference Galliano at some point, or do you think it's nice that he's just stuck to the original core sort of Christian Dior?
No, I think it's really nice that it's just he's doing what he's doing. You know, I think because what John Galliano did was what John Galliano did for Dior, and so I think that they both have a value for what the Dior brand stands for. But I don't think that someone like Raf Simons can go in and do a version of John Galliano. I mean, it would be interesting to see, because I think
trying to work out what
would that be.
But then I think a lot of people kind of scratched their heads when he was first appointed and thought, you know, I remember when he did that last collection at Jill Sander that was a lot more sort of romantic, you know,
Yeah.
those beautiful dresses, and people kind of thought, oh, okay, maybe. But before that, you know, people were really sort of, what does he have to do with kind of the new look or the bar jacket, this silhouette? It just seemed totally alien to someone who'd kind of been doing this amazing kind of streety menswear. So I think I guess I ask because I'm interested with this idea of referencing a house when we think of, you know, Dior being about Christian Dior, when actually Galliano is so much a part of the house's history, and why it seems like a taboo for a designer that comes later to reference. Why do they always have to go back to the beginning? I guess that's what it's that strange.
It's too soon.
Too soon. Yeah.
I think it's too soon. I think he had to go back to the beginning to get, you know, find his own roots of where he was in relation to Dior. And they do have the most fantastic archive of, you know, they've got the original bar jacket and skirt, or they've got a version of it there, and they've got everything kind of that was produced. They've got, obviously not every single piece, but they've got Saint Laurent pieces, they've got Marc Le Boham pieces, you know, all the way through. They've got an amazing archive, so you really can go in and see.
That's interesting, because this morning we were talking about sort of the lack of Schiaparelli archive. So do you think that that's really sort of will have been really helpful for Raf?
Whether or not he's actually visited it, I couldn't say, but it's there, you know. So.
And who's in charge of maintaining that? Is that something that
it's Dior?
Dior, they've always.
Yeah.
And did you find that was something that was used a lot when you were working in the atelier, that pieces would be brought out and?
Not particularly. I went to visit it. I had special permission that I was allowed to go and visit it because I was studying when I was there. But I'm sure in the studio they brought pieces out and looked at them.
Should we have a look at what's come in from the show so far? Is that all right?
It's just still coming through on Dior side.
Let's just start with the first look that's come in. Thanks. I'm really excited to see it now. I've got all riled up about Raf. I love him. I just think he's incredible. Is it someone who you've always looked at, Peter? Have you always liked Raf's work?
Yes.
Okay.
No, absolutely. I absolutely respect him as a designer, of course. Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think that we do the same kind of work, but that's neither here nor there.
But why do you think he's been so influential? Because it seems like I
think that he, you know, with his menswear, he's just, you know, he started out with some groundbreaking collections that people found really fresh and new when they appeared. He did some incredibly good, you know, collaborations. David Sims, you know, they did that book in the late 90s, which was great. And so I just think that that there's some really good. And going back to what you were saying as well before, the thing about employing a menswear designer to do couture, I think that that's really interesting, because I actually think that menswear designers work within a frame. They work within some kind of rule, you know, within a book almost, you know, because there's limits of what you can do with menswear before it becomes ridiculous or before it becomes this, you know,
costume.
Right, exactly. And I think that
so better at working to a brief.
Right, exactly. And sometimes that really refreshes women's wear, I think, because it doesn't become ridiculous.
No, that's really interesting, actually. I hadn't thought of it like that before.
I started out doing menswear, assisting.
Yeah.
And then got bored of it for that very same reason. There's only so far you can push it before it becomes ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I guess for couture, actually having that thing where you can never push too far, you've got to kind of work within a framework. It's quite, because couture, you know, there are all these rules and regulations, which are what makes it so wonderful.
Right.
But I guess it's quite useful to be used to kind of operating and maybe with always having an element of tradition in your mind. I think that's quite, that is really interesting.
It's just kind of respect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just respect for the heritage and just.
But I think also having a strong set of rules gives you something to push against.
Exactly.
So for someone like Raf, who he knows himself, he knows what he does, and what he does, you know, can be quite challenging.
Yeah.
I think that's really good. That it gives him something to push against.
Yeah.
It's not some kind of vague edge.
And it's been interesting kind of how slowly he's done it as well. I think he's not tried to run before he can walk. You know, it's been very piecemeal, which has been nice to see. What's our take on this? It's just coming in now. It looks incredibly minimal, I guess, compared to what we're used to seeing with the couture, because we've seen so many incredible sort of flowers and opulent sets, and you're not getting the impression of that from the images. What's our take?
It looks pure and clean, and with some of the can't see, meshy, air-texy, they feel quite sporty, which is exciting when you think of things that I always think, I don't know, about kind of like women in the 60s who would go, or the 80s, and would have a huge dress.
It's that modernity.
So this is young, modern and young.
What would this woman smell like, please?
French soap.
It's French soap.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, scrubbed
Fresh.
clean. She's really pure.
Really pure. And what do we think of the fact that it's relatively girly compared to what we've seen before? You know, we mentioned that bar jackets that he was kind of doing before. That was quite an androgynous start, but this feels there's a primness to it in a way. It's really reminding me of Simone Rocha as well.
They're like little 60s girls in their little kind of A-line dresses.
And it's all about the fabric technique, the surface technique, and working into the fabrics.
Because those silhouettes are so kind of straight and simple.
There we are.
There's a jacket.
I love that big silhouette in look 5.
Yeah, that's absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that you mentioned that, Heather, with the surface technique, because I think it's nice to see that from him when it's been very silhouette focused before up until now, to see him now turn to the silhouette and say, look, here's what the ateliers can do in this area. That's really exciting. I love this.
And it would be really interesting to see up close, is that hand cut, as you would expect from couture, or has he pushed it to laser cut? You know, what's he saying couture can be?
When you say what's he saying couture can be, is that sort of something that you think is going to be...
I think if it was laser cut, you'd think that was quite challenging for couture, which is traditionally everything is, you know, when you think everything's stitched by hand, to have bought a laser cutter in on the act would
we rather not just see it as hand cut though, because it's, it's such a...
Well, you'll be seeing it on the high street in laser cut.
Oh, that thought just makes me really sad.
But I think there's something nice, do you not think, about the fact that this can inspire young women to want to sort of, or not just young women to want to present themselves in a certain way. It almost feels like what he does, as well as creating these incredibly sort of technical pieces, is he's proposing a system for dressing. He's proposing an aesthetic that he wants women to sort of engage with, which is, you know, something very pure and clean, and it feels very removed from what we're seeing elsewhere. And I like the fact that you can see some sort of teenage fashion fan trying to kind of make her own version.
Yes, making her own, but the thought of just being like, oh well, let's do some of that cutout stuff, what we saw at Dior.
It's gonna be
it's a bit sort of really
heartbreaking.
Yeah, a bit heartbreaking. Just try to understand the process a little bit.
One thing we haven't talked about so much is the palette, and this feels incredibly sort of restrained for him. We've been used to seeing a lot of those neons, and he's done a lot of kind of pops throughout his shows, you know, like a real sort of dash of red on pink. What do we think of the fact that this is really sort of refined there and being very, just very black and white?
I think it's really pure, isn't it? I think it's sort of saying something about the times that we live in, and I think it's really stripped back to something pure, and then all the colours are coming now, probably in look 62, but up until now, I think, you know, and I'm sure if you're there and you're looking at these beautiful dresses, the way that they move and the techniques with, you know, the textiles and everything, I'm sure it looks fantastic.
I think. Sorry, I was just going to say it's really interesting as well, because with ready to wear, you know, everything's colourful because that sells well online, and it's quite interesting to think that actually you don't have to worry about stuff like that with couture. It doesn't have to be sort of in tune to the zeitgeist in that way at all, which is quite intriguing to see a monochrome collection.
But then I think that if Look 20 was in chartreuse or lime or something, it wouldn't be as magical. It's lovely that it is just letting all the technique, letting the craftsmanship, letting the silhouette shine out on its own.
It doesn't need that kind of a slogan or that kit, you know, that we're seeing the ready to wear. It feels like everything's got a gimmick to make it kind of, to give it a hook. Heather, talk to us a little bit about the techniques we're seeing. Obviously it's incredibly hard when we're not sort of inspecting these pieces and putting our head inside them and seeing how it's all done, but what's sort of striking you from what we're seeing?
Well, I think the amount of extra work that's gone into the way he's treating the fabric that obviously they've spent a lot of time investigating and researching how that, you know, he hasn't just gone out and chosen fabric and then worked on silhouette. This is very much about making really quite a three-dimensional texture on top of nearly all the garments that we've seen so far, with cutting, slashing, little bits folding down, fabric manipulation, things being pulled, and you know, that it just shows how much work's gone into them.
And where would that be done, sort of in the context of the atelier? Would that?
Well, I'm guessing for the dresses, that would all be done up in the flue atelier. You know, you just have enormous tables, and they would sit there with all the fabric laid out, and they'd be cutting.
We're getting the florals now, which is always nice to see. I think also one thing that's important to note with his collections is people often talk about, you know, how he's made them very modern and young, but it never feels like what he makes is sort of limited, like, to a certain age group. Obviously, you could get the sense that a lot of these pieces could be worn by women of different shapes and sizes, and even different cultures, which I think is always quite nice. I loved what he did last season, where he had the different sections for the different cultures, and I think even though this does feel useful, you're still getting that from this. Like look 32 is quite a nice example of that. You can imagine that being very... Is this what we were expecting to see? Are you surprised by this, Peter? Are you enthused by it? How's it making you feel?
Well, no, I think it's really jolly. I think it's really jolly is the wrong word, but I think it's really... It's kind of nice that it's just about the garments, that there's not all this, you know, staged background confusion that so your eyes started to flicker, but you're really, you know, concentrated on the 3D elements of the techniques of the textiles and the garments, and that is really your focusing point of the clothing, and hurrah for that, because you know, let's face it, I mean, fashion is... I mean, I know it's fantasy and everything else as well, but you know, it is about the garments.
It's about the garments.
I mean, from my point of view, of course, because I'm a fashion designer, so I have a great passion for it. So that always really makes me happy when you actually do focusing on that.
Yeah, when it just feels about that.
Yeah, then it's not about all these other things.
I think it takes real confidence in what you've produced to be able to make something just about the garments. You know, there's such an expectation now that what you do will be backed up with a sort of incredible set or a, you know, an Instagrammable moment. And I think it is really, I think it's a testimony that he must feel a lot of confidence in his work, that he's presented it in such a sort of a pure way. These pieces are just absolutely beautiful.
But you can see a lot of people I mean, not that I'm a favour of celebrities or anything like it, but you could see Julianne Moore wearing something like dress number 40.
Awesome.
But you could also see someone like Kate Marr wearing look number 40. I mean, that's, you know, it sort of has a broad age group, I think.
And it's been interesting, actually, some of the young women who've been wearing it, and some of the older women who've been wearing it. You know, it has got this, really been taken up with vigour by women who see themselves as a little bit sort of, who are a little bit more intelligent, a bit removed. You know, Jennifer Lawrence is a huge fan of it, which is always really exciting to see, because she's not really one of these celebrities that enjoys getting dressed up. She's quite open about that.
I think I just wish I could actually see all of the richness.
It makes you want to touch it, doesn't it?
I just think it's difficult with the screen, because I know that if we were actually sitting there, there would be a little bit more excitement about, oh my God, he's done that, and then that, and then followed up with that. Because you can get a feeling for it, but I think that I had a really close look yesterday at some of the techniques he was using in the last collection, where he'd been probably a lot more technologically, or it seemed like he was really pushing the idea of future within all of the little knit techniques or embroidery techniques from the last couture collection. And I bet if you could get a bit closer, you'd get a sense of that with these. So it's a little bit frustrating not to be there.
Dive in. And
I think that's why the show can never die, because you need to see it. You need to see it and almost be able to touch it.
And I guess it's that thing of as well, with maybe that's what we're finding frustrating as a kind of a strength of the collection, though, because couture should make you want to go and touch it and try it on and have it fitted to you, and there's something incredibly tactile about this collection. You want to interact with the pieces, you want to see how they'd move, you want to see how the fabrics would sort of feel against your body. There's something, and I guess that's what couture needs to be. It's not just the immediate visual impact. It goes back to what we were discussing before we'd even seen the collection, which means we're all very intelligent and predicted it well. But that's what couture needs to evoke. It's that you don't want to just kind of look great, you want to feel it in this really sort of...
Yeah, and hear the swish of the fabrics going past. Feel, if you're in the front row, you feel a bit of wind from the flue.
It's just beautiful. I love 46. It's
so cute.
It's so adorable. And this feels a little bit more girly for him. You know, there's been a severity to what he's done before. Even though we've had a lot of the flowers and the colours, I think for me it feels somewhat softer, even though it's monochrome. There's something a bit more playful.
But very strong identity. You any of those pieces, even just seeing this once, you're going to know who made them on the catwalk. I mean, on the red carpet. Really recognisable instantly as to whose pieces they are.
Right.
Are you impressed by this then, Heather? Do you like it?
I think I like it. I think it's fresh. I didn't know what to expect, having really analysed the last 3 couture shows. I wasn't sure what to expect here. So I think it's fresh. It's very youthful. As you were saying, there is a girliness to it, but he's worked really hard pushing the codes through of what this collection is about, I think. And I think it's definitely, you could see a lot of people really wanting those pieces. So for, young, super rich girls, that, they're going to be beating that big grey door down.
Would you be beating that big grey door down if you could?
If I could, yeah.
I think...
There was this wonderful... Did you see that? There was like this documentary on BBC, I think a few years ago, where there was this journalist that went around to visit couture clients, and she went to Mrs. Ford, I think it was Mrs. Ford, and she was showing her couture dresses that she'd bought years and all of them had like little pictures of the dress with a label written where she'd worn it, what comments she'd had on it, and when she could wear it again, so it wouldn't be... I just thought that's so wonderful. I mean, that's just
there's
the
this magic
pinnacle of... Yeah.
I think one of the takeaways that I'm getting from this collection is that it makes you feel inspired by couture again. It makes you feel like why it's relevant, but also how it can be modernised, and that's really exciting to see. Often you can be really sort of impressed or even moved by a really beautiful, opulent gown, but it doesn't suggest a future for couture. It doesn't suggest where couture could go next. And to me, this is showing sort of how a role that couture can have in fashion and how it can be moved forward.
He's moving it on.
Yeah, he is moving it on, but I think in such a respectful way, and that's really impressive. What's next for him then? What would we like to see after this? Do we hope this will go down well? Would we like to see him given all of Dior, given the menswear as well? What do we want next for Raf Simons?
Oh goodness.
Big
so
question.
me planning his career, I said, okay, 2 years time you're going to do this and
just more of the same then?
Or more of the same, but in the way that there's always a little bit of a surprise, and it's always what you would hope for and something else.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to overload him. I just think if he does this and he does it well,
you can just keep going forever.
Just keep going. Keep going for as long as he wants to. I wouldn't want to give him tons and tons and tons, and another. He's got enough.
Yeah.
To do this and the ready-to-wear collections,
plenty.
Is enough for anybody.
And his own brand.
And his own brand.
But we think he's coming up trumps. We're happy.
Oh God, yes,
Really
certainly me. Yes.
Well, thank you. It's been a happy, nice cheery panel. I'm excited for the rest of couture now. So thank you very much, everyone.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.
You're welcome.